Hello, I'm Ron Chapman. In my spare time I like to work in ceramics. My particular interest is ceramic sculpture in the form of small clay, earthenware clay figures such as this one. The size of the figure is limited by the size of my kiln, and usually I make a figure, a standing figure, about 16 inches in height. This is reduced further in the firing by about 7%. I like to commit my ideas to paper, and when I have the time and the inclination, I like to do pencil sketches such as this for later use. In ceramics, it is better to design the figure to be compact, and this figure would be classed as compact because the whole figure is tied together. This is an example of a figure that would be a little more difficult to make because the shovel handle floats free, and in the firing it well may slump. That is overcome by making a clay prop at the same time as the figure and prop it under the arm, and a shorter one to go under the shovel blade. But if you can keep the figure compact, such as this one, it becomes a much simpler figure to construct. The figure I have chosen for this demonstration will be this one. I usually work in the era of the gold fields of last century, and this depicts a miner who is having himself a little refreshment. The upturned tub here is one that was frequently used on the gold fields for puddling for gold, and I guess for doing their washing and various other things. In this instance we're using it turned upside down, and the miner is having some refreshment. Because of the limitations of my kiln, I usually work to figures of the same size or scale, and so I've made up this drawing which is scaled in feet and inches to the height of a person of about 5 feet 10. The various implements that may be used by a miner have also been scaled, and I can refer to them at any time. On the reverse side I use the same scale to depict the various limbs, and I find that quite useful. I'll hang that alongside. The tools that are required for clay modelling are fairly simple. First of all, you'll need a selection of boxwood tools such as this. That happens to be a bamboo skewer. Next time you go to the Chinese restaurant you can get yourself an assortment of those. Some of these tools I have made myself for a particular purpose, this one and this one, but the rest are easily obtainable, and you will no doubt find your own favourites among them. What may suit me may not be the one that you would choose for that job. But you find yourself tending to pick up the one tool more than the others, and so you develop your own taste in that way. One or two wire tools such as these, a fine bladed knife, and an assortment of cheap brushes. I say cheap because you will find that clay is very abrasive on brushes, and if you use expensive brushes, well then of course it becomes an expensive item, and it's not necessary for the purpose that we use them. A jar of water, a small clay extruder gun is a very helpful item. One or two items such as a longer knife and a coil cutter such as that. Two kidneys, a rubber kidney and a metal kidney. It must be a flexible metal kidney. And one of the main items is a small spray. They're very difficult to find a good one for this purpose. This one I brought back from China, but you need one of those. The only other item that comes to mind at the moment is a piece of natural sponge. Another essential piece of equipment is a substantial turntable. Remembering that the clay model will weigh in the plastic state about 15 or 16 pounds, and so the turntable must be fairly sturdy and quite strong. Well, what I'm about to do now is to prepare the clay body. I use a standard earthenware clay. I've cut that block into half, and I'm going to introduce into it some fired grog, not to be confused with the liquid variety. Grog is clay that has already been fired and ground. That is a number 16 grog, which is graduated from granules down to fine dust. I introduce that at the rate of 11 ounces of grog to 10-pound block of clay, and as a full block of clay weighs something in the area of 21 pounds, I'll be putting 22 to 23 ounces of grog into that body. Now, the reason for putting the grog in the body, it has several advantages. It opens the clay body. It reduces shrinkage. It assists drying. You'll find if you dampen the grog that it's much easier to mix. The body is also stronger, both in the drying stages and in the completed fired body. The grog also allows thicker sections of the model to fire safely, and it has the added advantage of less shrinkage. The final fired figure will not shrink as much as a figure made from clay that has no grog introduced. Well, what we're attempting to do is to get an even distribution of the grog within the clay, and you can see there that while the grog is distributed, we have fairly large pockets of grog and large areas of clay that have no grog in them, so that to overcome that I must divide the clay and wedge it like that. While I'm doing that, I'm picking up all these little pieces of grog that weren't included when I started. I'll divide that probably 10 to 15 times, and each division has the effect of distributing the grog more evenly through the body. Now, having done this division 10 to 15 times, you'll see that the grog is now quite evenly distributed throughout the clay body, and I'm quite happy with that. You can purchase specifically for modelling a very finely blended clay, and it models beautifully, but if you're going to introduce grog for the reasons I gave before, well, then it becomes pointless to purchase the very finely blended clay. Pounded our clay to the appropriate size. I'm now going to cut that to form the slab, the basis of the model. I've set this bow, this cutting bow, to approximately 5/8 of an inch in depth, and I'll cut the slab through like that. The next thing I do is to place on this some grog, which I smooth over. This is the kiln shelf. I prefer to model directly onto the kiln shelf where possible, because the least amount of shifting that you have to do, the less likely you are to have accidents. I'll pick up that slab, lay it on there. The reason for the grog underneath is that it allows the slab to shrink as it's drying, and it prevents the clay from sticking to the shelf. Now that forms the basis for our model. Now our figure is sitting on a stump, so my next job is to construct the stump. I have already cut another slab, and from that I've cut these small pieces. This is clay slip, which is clay which is watered down until it's quite watery, and that's our glue. The clay stump cannot be constructed in one piece, because if we did that, well then it would explode in the firing. So it must be hollow. So I'm making some ribs to go inside the stump. So that the shape doesn't become distorted in the firing. And I'll just glue that there. Work that in with my fingers. We now pop the top on the stump. Now the next thing I want to show you is that I'm going to put some holes through those ribs, and the reason is that I want all those chambers, those internal chambers, to be interconnected. In other words, air can freely pass from one to the other, and the reason for that is that we cannot allow any chambers to be totally sealed off, because if we did that, it would explode in the firing. I'll next score the base of the stump. That gives me better adhesion when the joint is made between that and the base. Tap that down and make sure that the joint is melded together. Well, the next thing I have to do is to make the tub. I'm going to use a wheel to do this. If you don't have a wheel, there's no reason why it can't be done in the same manner as we did the stump, but having a wheel, I'll use it. Now the walls of this have to be much thicker than they would be if I was throwing a pot. If I was making a pot for domestic use, well then the walls would probably be about 1/4 of an inch thick. But in this instance I want the walls to be much thicker, about ½ inch thick. Now I've made up this small template which will give me the strapping that I want around the barrel. Cut that top off. Now I'll cut that off and leave it for a while so that it can firm up sufficiently to be handled for the next stage. Now the tub has firmed up sufficiently that I've been able to add these ribs similar to those I put in the tree stump, and also I have punctured the ribs with the holes. The next thing I'm going to do is to place it here and turn the top. The grog creates quite a coarse texture when it's turned like this, but that's easily overcome. We can just force that down with a flat tool, and that forces the grog back into the clay body and leaves it quite smooth again. I'm going to mark the planking on the tub with a pair of dividers. I've divided roughly where the planks are going to go, and with a wire tool I'll mark them like this. I'm next going to just lightly texture the planks like so, and then across the top I'll be doing the same. I'm now going to position the tub on the base. I'm not going to make it a final fixture just yet, but what I need to know is for the positioning of the legs and feet of the figure. So if I just mark that like that, and then with the dividers I can mark that circle, and I know then that the feet must be positioned outside that line. I'm now going to start the figure on the stump, and I've formed a small piece of clay here which are going to represent the hips. Now I'll score that for better adhesion. Do the same on the stump, and with the slip now that's going to represent the hips and buttocks of the figure. And the next thing to do is I've cut some with this tool here, passing it through the block of clay. I've cut those pieces which are going to form the legs. Now anything thicker than this, or that piece there, would probably not fire without some damage, and that's why the stump and the tub and some parts of the figure have to be hollow, but the legs at this scale will fire okay. Now I'll turn the foot like that, and referring again to my sketch here, that will give me the point at where I want the knee to bend. Sculpting in clay is an additive and a subtractive process. We add on and we take away at different times, whereas of course if you're working in stone or timber, it's purely a subtractive process. But clay has that advantage that you can also add as well as taking away. Now I don't stick rigidly to my sketch. If I initially plan to have the legs there, I might at this stage decide I like it further out like that, but so it's not rigid, but in this case I'll leave it where it is. It's now become obvious why I had to mark the position of the tub on the base, because it tells me where the feet have to go on the model. I'll now shape these a little more, and by referring to my sketch again I can tell exactly how long I want those feet to be. Because there's something going to go on the inside of those legs, I have to develop these a little further than I otherwise would. Normally I like to work all over the model and not finish any particular part before the final going over, but you can't always stick rigidly to that idea, purely because you're only making obstructions for yourself. I'm now going to cut a hole through this hip area right down through into the stump. Now if you remember back to what I said earlier, I'm trying to interconnect all these chambers to make sure that the upper torso has an air passage through into the hollow stump, and to make certain that that doesn't get clogged up with clay, I force a little piece of paper, rolled up paper, into that. The next thing I do is to cut a template for the torso about what I think it would be, remembering that it must be a little taller in height than the height of the shoulders, because I'm going to fold the shoulders down and leave a portion of the neck in this slab of clay. So having cut my template, this is my slab I'm going to put on there. I'll score that once more. A few score marks in the slab. Some slip. I now have to position that on the hips to form the torso. Now what I'll do here, I'll just so that I get a nice smooth line at that joint, I'll cut a taper on each of those halves, a matching taper, and slip them together. Working it well in to make sure that we have no gaps. Now on the inside I have to work a tool inside and pull those two halves together, and on the bottom where the torso meets the ball for the hips, I'm also pulling that clay in together. Now I'm going to force paper down inside this torso, and that will be left inside the figure to be burnt out. It serves a couple of purposes by forcing it down so that it completely fills that space. It's giving me a nice firm body to work on, and it also helps to dry that section fairly quickly, so that the body is much sooner able to support the rest of the structure. And a piece of clay and formed it to roughly the shape of what I want the head to be, and once again I've referred to my scale drawing, and because the figure I want the head to be looking up, I've got the neck going back at that angle. Now what I'm going to do now is I want this head to be hollow, so I'm going to cut a cap. I'll cut the top off and mark it there so I know which way it goes back, and I'm going to hollow that out. And next I'm going to cut a hole through the neck, and this will link up with the hole that I've left in the neck of the torso, so that you can see there that is completely hollow. Now once again, so that that cavity doesn't close up, I'm going to roll up a piece of paper, and I want to force that down, right down through the neck. Now I'll glue this cap on here, and to make sure that I have a good adhesion, I'll just tap that down like that. Work it in with my fingers. Now you'll notice that piece of paper that I have that's now filling the head and protruding from the neck, that will form, giving me the added advantage of providing a spigot for when I want to join it to the neck. That will go down through the hole in the neck. Now I'm now going to start to model the head, and to do that I use this tiny pot, which is actually one of my glaze tests, and I pop it in there. And the reason for that is that when you hold the clay for any length of time, it dries out very rapidly, and I want to avoid that happening. So I hold it in that little pot. Now the first thing I do is to push in the eye sockets. I find that if I make sockets, the eyes come out much more naturally than if I just try to form them on the surface. Next we'll work in the nose and gradually develop the features from there. Next thing I do is to put in the eyeballs into the sockets. Even though the eyes will be nearly shut on this particular model, I think it gives you a more accurate shape in the final analysis. A little further developed, and I've reached the stage where the ears have to go on, remembering that the positioning of the ear, the top of the ear is roughly level with the top of the eyebrow. Now going to attach the head to the torso, and with the paper spigot that we've left protruding, and carefully follow the twist of the paper until it sits nicely in position, and then carefully trying not to damage it with finger pressure, I get it in position and work in there. Now that's on. The next thing I want to do is with the metal kidney, and once again I must mention that it must be a flexible kidney. A stiff metal kidney is of no value. And what we're going to do is to start to pull the clay of the legs into shape like this. Same on the other side. And I'll do that also on the boots and the other parts of the legs, and also pull the back into shape. I'm taking off all the little knobs of clay and leaving it quite round and smooth. You can see how the kidney pulls the grog out of the surface and leaves little imperfections, but they are easily smoothed out later. I have to spray the figure at regular intervals, because although it sounds a contradiction, I want it to get firm, but I also have to keep it moist. But because of the paper inside the figure now, it tends to dry very fast, and because all this modelling takes a certain amount of time, the figure is drying faster than I can model, so I have to keep using the spray. Now I'm going to start putting the clothes on the figure. And if you're using small amounts of clay, small pellets or rolls like that, you don't really need slip, providing the clay is moist. And I'm putting this around here, and that's going to represent the roll of the shirt at the bottom of the figure. I'll just blend that in like that. And you can see that that's starting to take the form of the shirt. Now that's an ideal place. I mentioned before that all of these areas have to be vented to the open air. Now I want to do that in such a way that it's not seen, so that if you take the skewer and go up under the roll of the shirt and push that in gently until you feel the paper core inside the torso. Actually one vent is enough, but I usually put in several in case inadvertently I may close the hole up, but we'll do that again at a later stage. Now the next thing is to fit some small strips of clay. This one going on around here is to represent the collar. And another strip starting from the base of the shirt and coming up there. The refining will be done later. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to fit a vest on the figure, and to do that I take a piece of paper. Now this hand towel is ideal because it will bend more easily than other types of paper, and it also is better to use this type of paper to screw up and put inside the figure, because it's not hard, it's quite soft. Now I'll just go around like that, mark the vest, and having cut it out I'm left with something like this. Now once again it doesn't have to fit exactly, because we're able to make some adjustments later on, but that's roughly the shape that I need. Now I've rolled out this piece of clay very thin with a rolling pin and cut it to the shape of my template, and I'm now carefully going to attempt to attach it to the figure. Once that hardens up a little, I'll smooth that out a bit better. Now from a solid roll of clay, much as I form the legs, I'm going to form the arms. I've cut that off to fit there, and the same with this side. I'll just slip those on. The reason that the arms were left till last is because you'll find it, if you're going to dress the figure, such as I put that vest on, you'll find it quite difficult to manoeuvre those pieces around the arms, and when you're handling thin pieces of clay such as the clothing is formed with, it very easily gets damaged and torn in the process. Now, out of this, out of a sausage of clay, I've formed this bottle, which is to be held in this hand. And I'll just fit that where it's going to go in the fist, like that. And I've also modelled a small glass, and I've just scooped out a small hollow to accept that. I'll fit them on there, and the next thing I'll be doing is to work some fingers on. With this tool that I spoke about earlier, this little extruder, I can extrude the clay that I'm going to use to make the fingers. That's probably about the size I'd use for the thumb, but for the others I'll just roll it out a bit thinner. As you can see, I've developed one hand, and I'm about to do the same with the other one. I put on the longest finger first, which is that one there. And above it. And working the thumb on the other side of the bottle. Now, with small pieces of clay, I'll have to close up those gaps and develop the knuckles. Now, as you can see off camera, I've done a little more work on this. I've placed the tub in the position that it had to occupy, and I've done quite a bit of modelling on the creases in the clothing, on the sleeves and in the trousers, and worked on the boots. Pockets at the back, the stump has been textured just with a tool like that. And also I have cut a hole in the head and stuffed it with paper to connect the hole that will be inside the crown of the hat into the interior of the head. So next I'll fit that on. Now, as I have earlier explained, I formed a paper template to go around the head, and from that I've cut this hat brim, and that's the next piece to go on. It needs to be a little tight, in other words, to force it on, because it looks better if the inside of the brim just turns up. Now all I have to do with that now is to just pull that clay together where the brim joins the crown. Put on a couple of the final touches, the breast pocket on the vest. I'll glue the remaining bottle on the tub, and the final brushing. A bit of water and just pull that clay in together. I have been doing this periodically off camera as I've been developing the piece. A very fine brush is needed for the facial features so that you don't pull the grog out onto the surface. If you do happen to do that, you just push it back and just gently brush it down again. Now, the most important thing, I've mentioned it before, but you must make sure that you're vented to the inside. Put one in or two into the tub, and if you've done everything right, it should be all interlocked, all the air spaces interlocked and vented to the outside. Just around that edge to finish it off. And don't forget to sign your work if you're proud of it. I signed mine right there on the boot. The figure is now completed, ready for drying and firing. It will have two firings, a bisque firing to 1000 degrees, and then the metallic oxide iron or manganese oxide will be sprayed on, brushed down and fired to O2, which is 1120 degrees C. But the drying must be slow, it's very important. So what I do, I cover that with a piece of plastic and I'll leave that on for 8 hours, remove it for 8 hours for a period of 4 to 5 days to make sure that the initial part of the drying is very slow. You'll realise that a lot of this work has been developed off camera, but a figure like this would normally take me from 24 to 28 hours work to develop.